The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Schlender presiding. We all rise for the Honorable Judge Schlender.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus Spider-Man 3, a 2007 superhero movie about wall crawler Peter Parker, who struggles to maintain a normal life despite disruptions by old friends, new enemies, and an alien symbiote that brings out the worst in him. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Big Ben Haslar, you are appearing on behalf of the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
What is Spider-Man 3? You sure you want to know? Debating fandom films is not for the faint of heart. If somebody said this was a fun little film, if someone said it seamlessly juggled all its many plot lines, somebody lied. But let me assure you, this sequel, like any series fallen from grace, is about expectations. Expectations that came from two spectacular predecessors. These films, Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. The comic book movies we liked before we even knew we liked comic book movies. I'd like to tell you this was a Return of the King-esque third movie. Heck, I'd even take Jurassic Park 3. But instead, we have a film that tries to juggle too many balls at once. A film that studio interference forced director Sam Raimi to include a villain that he did not believe in, all while trying to shoehorn his own villain in while delving into the psyche of Peter and Mary Jane, which is what we've come to expect. There's a very noticeably missing Danny Elfman and a step down in cohesion. There's a New York loving Spidey, which is in direct opposition to not just Spider-Man lore, but also the two films that led up to it. To quote its director when asked if it was bad, he agreed that it wasn't the right word for it. He said it was, quote, awful. Whatever life holds for this franchise, you can never forget the expectations have people going in. This is its gift. Its curse. This is Spider-Man 3.
What is he parodying? I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Big Ben. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Nathaniel Jonsson. Please present your what? I'm reading it. I'm reading it right here. It's Nathaniel Jonsson. Please present your opening statement.
First of all, the prosecution isn't entirely wrong. Now, when I agreed to be the defense for Spider-Man 3, I immediately was excited about it and then went, oh my God, what have I done? Because I hadn't seen this movie in probably at least a decade. And I thought about it and I said, well, first of all, I mean, this is a movie that I'm not entirely sure I like. My memories of it were not very solid. And then I said, well, also, the jury, the court, everybody already doesn't like this movie. Am I walking into an uphill battle? Am I walking into something that cannot be done? Because is this a kangaroo court? Is the jury already decided that Spider-Man 3 is a terrible film? And they may very well be. But then I watched the movie and noticed, I was like, well, there's actually some really good stuff in here. And so my main point is that while I am not going to argue that this movie is a great movie, and in fact, I have a certain amount of enmity for the modern trend of re-examining these older films and saying, well, it's quite good, actually. Or it's an underrated classic. It is not those things. But it is not guilty of being a bad movie. And the reason for that is, as my opponent already said, that, yes, there were a lot of problems and a lot of people that weren't completely on board with doing this movie. And I think all of its problems can probably be laid on Sony Pictures, who did force Sam Raimi's hand on quite a few things. Sam Raimi originally didn't want to do the film. And then when it said he didn't want to do the film, Kirsten Dunst wasn't going to do the film. Then that changed. And then Tobey Maguire didn't want to do the film, claiming he had a back problem. They said, well, we'll call Jake Gyllenhaal, and his back miraculously healed. And so he was like, okay, I'll do the movie. Now, as the opposition has put it, that yes, of course, it's an uneven film. In fact, the editing is actually kind of is very awkward. It's not really very well put together, to be honest. However, there are sparks of life in this movie that I think really actually very much work. And I think that lies in the fact that there is a movie here that Sam Raimi wanted to make, and it's in there. It is also unfortunately, Spider-Man 4 as well. And ultimately, what makes this film not guilty of being a bad film is the movie that Sam Raimi wanted to make, the one that has a lot of heart, the one that has a lot to do with the interpersonal relationships of these characters, is still there, and it actually is effective. I think that we do care about these characters to a degree, and therefore that will be the rest of my opening statement.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jonsson. Mr. Big Ben Haslar, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
Why doesn't Big Ben get a silly accent?
In fact, Mr. Haslar, you may proceed with your first exhibit.
I almost feel like resting now. He did a good job of managing expectations there.
But he is still gunning for not bad. You still have quite a bit of a lift, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, I got 3 punches, and they all kind of center around the villains in this film.
No kicks?
So the first one that I want to talk about is the backflip is at the end.
Very good, very good.
That'll be my closing.
I love it.
I want to talk about Sandman. He's the first villain we're introduced in this thing. It's Thomas Hayden Church playing him, and he's set up to be sort of a sympathetic villain who robs banks to pay for his daughter's operations because she's chronically ill. How he gets his powers has got to be one of the dumbest things and most comic booky in movie history. He runs into some sort of molecularization test that nobody is watching. He just sort of hops over a chain link fence with absolutely no security around it to get to it. And scientists are sort of aware that there's like a mass displacement in this field, but they don't care. It's like, whatever. It's a bird. It'll fly away because, scientists don't care about variables like changing their results or anything. Yeah, let's just run it. And they're not even like looking at the, molecularization as it happens. They're just looking at this thing through computer screens. So they're not even present. This would never happen, even in a comic book world.
I would object and remind you that you're actually using comic booky as a flaw in a movie about being comic booky. I mean, even in Spider-Man 1, Peter gets bitten by a genetically engineered spider that somehow escaped its enclosure. The whole thing is already kind of ridiculous. So, I mean, comic booky...
I would give you that one. Yeah,
comic booky
the other
is...
2 villains.
I'm inclined to sustain that because, it is a comic book movie, Mr. Haslar.
Well, yeah, I would agree on the Spider-Man point. That's good. But Green Goblin and Doc Ock, like the way they get their powers in the previous 2 films are more in line with their character and their trajectory. Not in this case at all. But to connect him up to Peter, they tried and set him up as the real killer of his uncle out of nowhere. He was already arrested for this crime, apparently, because he's escaping from prison at the beginning of this film. And when he escapes, the police actually refer to it as the, quote, Ben Parker homicide, like Ben Parker was a celebrity or something like that. So anyway, he's out there, he's running around, and then Peter and Aunt May are brought into the police station only after he escapes and told that he was the real killer. Why they didn't tell him when he was actually prosecuted the first time, I have no idea. And he actually asks that. Peter asks, why weren't we told about this? And the only answer we're given to is to calm down. No, I will not calm down. This twist makes no damn sense. Where was his partner when he was robbing the NYWL? We clearly see the entirety of that robbery in Spider-Man 1. So their plan was, I'll rob this guy, and you'll just hang out here and just, jack some random car, hoping that one of them's parked and that there's not a police car in the area, and then we'll both drive off. That's a terrible plan. And not to mention, Peter Parker would know about this if he was arrested and in prison for killing Ben Parker. But no. And then after that, this whole sympathetic thing that he's like sort of set up to be completely disappears. He just turns into sort of a sand golem that goes, wah, 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 smash, smash. And that's it. You know, we don't get any more from him until the very end of this thing, where he like doesn't ask Peter for forgiveness, but gets forgiveness anyway. And then he just sort of evaporates into sand. And I don't know what's happening there. Like, did he die? Is he going off to rob more banks? Was like not being forgiveness, like the whole thing holding him together? What was going on here? If we include the Spider-Man No Way Home into this, it makes it even more confusing because Venom should be the one in that film because he did die, whereas Sandman is a little bit more ambiguous. I pass to the defense.
I was going to say, Mr. Johnson there, do you want to respond to Sandman, the Uncle Ben retcon?
Well, I would say that I think what Sandman is doing well in this movie, and honestly, I'll concede most of those points are there. It is an awkward retcon for sure. Although I did read it as they didn't actually completely know he was connected to the Uncle Ben murder at the time. I think
objection. They say it in the film when he escapes the first time, the Ben Parker homicide.
No, but he says it after he says he admitted it when he was in prison. He confessed to his cellmate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Still, Peter would know about it.
Yeah, well, I would say that he probably would have been told as soon as there was new evidence in the case. But also, I mean, we've got a movie where cops are. Superhero movies in general, usually the police are kind of useless anyway. But I feel like it's part of Raimi's charm in the ways that these movies work is a very loose acceptance of traditional reality. But as far as Sandman himself, yeah, I agree that a lot of things that are done with him are very awkward. But he's running a certain parallel with Peter about doing kind of the wrong thing for the right reason. And forcing Peter to confront an aspect of himself that he's not willing to really deal with. That when he finds out about this guy, he wants to kill him. And, Mary Jane even comes to see him and says, like, hey, maybe don't want to go kill him. Like, you killed that other guy by accident. And Peter's like, yeah, I don't want to feel anything about that right now. I want to be angry. Because the entire kind of point of this movie is Peter confronting things about himself that he's not willing to confront. And I do agree with you that I mean, it's very jarring that he suddenly, like, Venom comes to see him and says, hey, we should both kill Spider-Man. And Simon goes, yeah, okay, I guess that's the thing.
Okay.
I have to be involved in the climax somehow, so I'll go do this. But I think that the character himself and what he's representing is a little bit more powerful than just the logic lapses that occur as a result of his involvement.
All right, I think you guys both made some very good points about Sandman for the jury, especially Ryan, to consider. So, Mr. Haslar, if you'd like to move on to your next point.
The next villain I'd like to focus on is the New Goblin, and yes, that's what they call him in the credits.
I'm going to object. I'm the judge. Don't call him the New Goblin in my court. He's the Green Goblin 2 or something.
That's what it says in the credits.
I know. Keep going.
Peter calls him Goblin Jr., which I actually kind of like better.
Jr.
I like that too, yeah.
Better than the New Goblin. But anyway, so he's apparently, this is Harry Osborn. He's apparently been planning his revenge against Pete for years, since Peter and Mary Jane are at a point where he's ready to propose to her, but he's just been sitting on this the whole time. I don't know if they've ever talked since then. The timelines don't really sync up here. But he's back and he's like making a snowboard glider. I don't know if he made it. That's another point because snowboards are dumb. The original Green Goblin
snowboards weren't dumb in 2007 though.
They were very hip. I'll allow it.
They were cool. They were cool in 2007.
I still ask, did Harry make this?
Man.
Because Harry doesn't have any technical know-how. Pete's the guy who got him through science classes.
It was
so I
sponsored
don't know
by
if this is
Mountain
like
Dew.
Order in my court. Please continue.
The Dew Goblin.
Or maybe Bernard helped.
I said order.
I'll get to that.
You're all on thin ice, especially Ryan. Keep going, Ben.
But beyond the snowboard, his costume is just boring. He's just like, he's got blades on his arms, and that's about the only other exciting piece about him. He's just wearing black with like a face mask. That's it. But he and Peter fight, and he hits his head, and he evenly forgets just enough things to make it easy on Sam Raimi to pay attention to the other balls he's juggling, right? So amnesia has got to be one of the laziest plot devices, I think, in cinema history, and it's in full exposure here.
But the amnesia...
and then he gets...
Objection. The amnesia is meant to once again reconnect him with Peter, in the sense that Peter, rather than actually have a conversation with him about what's been going on between them, shrugs and says, well, I'm taking the easy way out. This is easy now.
No, that was what Raimi said when he was writing the script.
I don't know. I think that the interpersonal character relationships are important to this film, and Peter needing to reconnect with Harry without actually telling him the truth about anything that's happened is, again, another point of the idea that Peter isn't holding up to his responsibilities as an adult.
Well, I'll tell you how you could make this better. Is if they had this whole like showdown in Spider-Man 2, or like he knows about his identity and everything, and then he just doesn't do anything about it, and Peter is always in the doubtful whether he's just playing with him or whether he forgave him. All the while, Harry would be like sort of sowing these seeds of distrust between him and MJ, sort of doing a long plan for his revenge. That would have been better, but he didn't have the time for that. So anyway, he gets his memory back. Towards the end of the film, when Raimi feels like he wants to focus on him again, and comes up with the plan of making him, Harry comes up with the plan of saying, hey, MJ and Pete need to break up. That'll attack his heart. But this doesn't make any sense because he has nothing to blackmail her with. Why is she going along with this plan? She goes up to Peter on the bridge and says, like, hey, I'm going to break up with you. And instead of like saying, hey, Harry's literally right over there in the bushes. He's the one making me do this. There's no reason for her to go along with Harry's plan in this case.
Except that she's actually been thinking about breaking up with him. She's already been considering it.
You don't think she'd like bring it up hey, I want to break up with you, but I'm kind of being Harry's the guy who's evil again, by the way, and he's the Green Goblin. So it is a little awkward for her to not say, hey, it's a trap. But at the same time, he does say, if you want Peter Parker to live, you're going to have to do this, which basically suggests that if she breaks up with him, he'll leave Peter alone. Now that scene maybe should have been in there. That way, no,
and maybe that scene should have been in there. But that's the way I looked at it. Is that he's saying, Mary Jane, you have to break up with him, or I'm going to repeatedly try and kill this guy. If you do break up with him, I'll leave him alone.
That would have helped. That would have helped tremendously. But I say to the jury, that's not in the film. But the hardest part I have trying to swallow with Harry is this Deus Ex Bernard that comes in at the end. Harry's butler, who apparently knew Norman was killed by his glider the whole time, never says a word until it's very convenient for Spidey and Goblin to team up at the end and fight Sandman and Venom. Does this somehow eradicate the insanity that he was like supposed to be getting from the serum and him hallucinating his dad the whole time? What is going on there? I passed to the defense.
Well, what would you like to say about Harry's insanity?
Well, I will say that it's awkward. I don't have much of a rebuttal for that, to be honest. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I mean, there are things in this film that don't quite work. I think that they're all in service of an emotional payoff that Raimi is trying to do, because his point in this film is supposed to be, I think, about these interpersonal relationships and Peter Parker. It's more about Peter Parker than Spider-Man. And I think that Harry, what we're supposed to get is the emotional payoff of that, Peter actually becomes vengeful and goes after Harry on his own, disfigures him, my reading of it is kind of that the idea of Harry kind of turning good again at the end of the movie is supposed to be his emotional connection to Peter winning out over insanity. Again, should there have been a scene? Yes. But we had to make room for Venom. And which I'm sure is my next,
which leads into my next point.
The next point, right?
I'm assuming that is what's next. Yes.
All right, Mr. Haslar, please continue.
All right, let's talk about Venom in the symbiote. Despite the fact that we have already established JJ's son as being an astronaut in the previous film, and the cartoon had already done the hard work of, introducing the symbiote to Spider-Man through that. No, this film lazily introduces the symbiote as just riding on a little tiny meteor and quietly crashing next to, the super-powered Spider-Man, this one person that it, would be most beneficial for it to fuse with. It hops on his bike, and then it just hides in the closet for a while, I guess waiting for the right moment when Peter's in a state of mental anguish. So that's lazy on the face of it. The symbiote stays as a fully formed spider suit in his closet, rather than turning into a goo form that's sentient. And Peter doesn't even really ask what this thing is. He does bring it into Dr. Connors for a bit, but then he becomes very distanced from the whole thing. I think they sort of use the fact that he's been wearing the suit to make it to say that he doesn't care. But still, the first time he gets into the suit, he's just wow, this is something else. Which is another thing, because it doesn't really portray Spider-Man as being that much more powerful with the suit. And maybe that's because they've already portrayed him as being damn near invincible in the previous two films, but it's just we just sort of see him swing a bit faster. And that's really it. That's all we see. That's the only thing that it does. And he gets this greasy emo haircut, and he dances around. This isn't what we were promised in the trailer. You look at that poster, and it's very cool. We see the reflection of this dark-suited Spider-Man and the real Spider-Man on opposite sides. And it's sort of promising something that it never delivers. We don't really get that battle. He pretty much slides into being this sort of guy who dances around the whole time. It reminds me of Superman 3 in a lot of ways, where Superman turns evil. But you don't really believe it because the actor is just such a nice guy. Peter Parker, same thing. It's just, you don't believe it. He just comes across as goofy. And I've never been able to pin whether people think he's cool or whether disgusted by him, because in edits, it seems like Raimi incorporates both into the film. So there's two scenes where he dances. And in my opinion, there's really no defending them. And Into the Spider-Verse, they joke that we don't really talk about this. But unfortunately, this is a legal proceeding, so we're going to have to talk about it.
All right, let's let Nathan respond to the dancing.
Okay, I got more points, so come back to me.
Well, first of all, I object to the term lazy. Convenient, maybe, but that's how movies are made sometimes, is that they have to be convenient. However, I will say, and I wrote this down, I think the dancing scenes and Selfish Peter are very, very much effective. Raimi is interested in these characters because they are wholesome characters. He is very much interested in sort of that mom and pa, apple pie Americana earnestness that these characters have. What this is showing is Peter, even when he's being a jerk, is still pretty wholesome. And I don't think you're supposed to buy it that he's mean or evil, because it's also, pointed out, he's still going out and being Spider-Man at night. He's going out there and beating up criminals. So he's still doing what he's kind of supposed to be doing, but he's doing it in a manner where, once again, from the word go in this movie, Peter has been buying into his own hype. He's been buying into how special he is, that when this symbiote takes over, it just sort of allows him to be selfish in a way that feels good. And he says that a couple of times. The suit feels good when he wears it. I look at it more like it's not fully defined, but it looks to me like it's almost like a steroid thing or a drug use thing, where this feels good, but it's making me into a person that deep down I might really be, but I don't want to be. Because again, that's the whole point of the movie, is Peter is being a person that he's not wanting to be, or thinks he's not, which is the more about the self-delusion of it. Again, it's all supposed to be that, even his most selfish endeavors are still pretty nerdy. And he's not that good at being bad. But as far as the dance scene, it's a little goofy, but how does that scene end? That scene ends with a devastating moment, in my opinion, where he brings Gwen to the jazz club, and he has this dance with her, and she's very much into it. And then he kind of points out it's discovered that he's doing it all to make MJ jealous, and she's devastated. And then she looks at, and she actually apologizes to MJ. She says, "I'm so sorry," and runs off. And then it builds up to Peter, trying to get into a fight with a doorman and actually striking MJ. I think those scenes are, maybe the dance itself is goofy, but what it builds to and what it ends up having is very powerful stuff. And I think that to claim that it absolutely doesn't work, that it does nothing for the narrative, I think is not accurate.
Well, I sort of disagree. I mean, I do agree that him striking MJ is definitely like sort of a gasp moment for the audience, and one that does like propel him to take the suit off, which is where the film needed to go. But it's just very jarring to have like the dance number before that, where he's going, "Now dig on this," and swinging on the light fixtures. Like the whole time that's happening, I'm questioning: is this real? Is this actually in the film right now? And that's never what a filmmaker wants. And then to transition from that to actually striking her. Again, it's not what like the poster sort of promises to me, and it's not what the original comic book line promises to me. I'm expecting him to sort of get darker, maybe on the verge of killing someone, rather than sort of accidentally hitting MJ.
Well, he does think he kills Sandman. He does go out to attempt to take a life. And then he talks to Aunt May about it, thinking that Aunt May will be overjoyed that the man who killed Uncle Ben is dead, and she actually says, "No, that's actually the complete wrong way to look at it."
That's the transformation moment, though. That's the moment he needs to take the suit off, not earlier. And then he's like, "Okay, now I'm going to go dance in front of Sax for a while."
Well, I mean, again, the point of the dance sequence is not the dance sequence itself, but where it ends up. It's about where it ends up. That's what I think determines the weight of a scene, is how that scene finishes, and it finishes with some actually very emotional stuff that I think ties in once again to the idea that Raimi's film, the film Raimi wants to make here, is about personal relationships. It's about how these characters are responding to the lives they're leading, and Peter manages to do the one thing he really never really wanted to do, which is hurt two people that he allegedly cares about.
All right, Mr. Haslar, why don't we let you? That's a very good conversation about the dancing scene. Glad we got that in. So, Mr. Haslar, if you'd like,
it had to be spoken.
It had to be done.
It was going to happen. Yeah, it was going to happen.
I'll wrap up as quickly as I can for my final points, which is around when it gets Venom himself. So he ditches the suit and it binds with Topher Grace, who was barely in this film until again we need him because Raimi just despises the character, and it's apparent. So he's Eddie Brock, Topher Grace, is praying for Jesus to murder Peter, which I don't know.
Come on, that's one of the best parts of the whole movie. Is he goes in, he sits down in the pew, says, "I come before you humbled and humiliated, and I ask for one thing: kill Peter Parker." That is awesome, but
clearly a man who's never read a Bible.
No, clearly not. Yeah.
And then Sandman rematerializes like right then to like go, we got to wrap up. We're getting towards the end. And then he and Venom meet in like maybe a 30-second clip where they just decide to team up and beat up Spider-Man. And then we're rocketed into the third act battle where Topher picks up MJ in a taxi for some reason. And then we have to have a news team literally sort of narrate what's happening because we have such whiplash of what just happened so fast. At one point, one of the team members even say, He seems to come out of nowhere, just when all hope seems to have been lost, as if Raimi was saying, "This is what you're supposed to be feeling, audience, not the confusion that you currently are." And the battle itself is rushed. Did the villains make this horrible plan? I'm going to fight up Spidey up here for a while, then I'll knock him down there into the sand, and then you can fight him for a little while, and I'll chill out up here. It's all fast. It's very slapdash, and then the film just ends, as does my case, Your Honor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Haslar. Nathaniel, you may now present any further exhibits you would like for the court.
Okay. Well, like I've said a couple times here, and it's kind of the core of my case, is Sam Raimi wanted to make a movie that Sony Pictures didn't want him to make. And I think that the first exhibit I would make is the fact that this thing even works at all. Which, but by the way, all of my opponent's exhibits were all about the villains, which is the thing Raimi's least interested in, and doesn't really talk about any of the actual emotionality of the film or emotional connection of the film. And I think that's the movie Raimi wants to make, and I think that he does that. But the main point I wanted to make in this first exhibit is Raimi's actually doing pretty decent work with stuff he didn't want to do. It's been pointed out that Raimi did not want Venom in this movie. I didn't want Venom in this movie. The idea behind putting Venom in this movie is I think they were thinking even then about spinning off. Like, we'll make Venom movies. And Raimi actually rather, I think, skillfully slams the door on that.
No, he just postponed it, unfortunately.
They ended up doing something else with it, but years later. But I think that he basically does slam that door on like, if you're going to do Venom, you're not doing it off of my work. But I think that the fact that he uses this plot line that he didn't want to have rather effectively to ultimately sort of work with the emotionality and mental state of his lead character is actually pretty remarkable. That he found a way to do something positive with something that he absolutely did not want to have, to me is a remarkable thing. And so we do have, excuse me, we do have, the black costume getting onto Peter and it causing, amplifying Peter's less heroic traits, which are traits he's already exhibiting prior to getting the black costume. They just make him worse. Which is sort of the point, is that after he does rip off the suit, which I think is a great scene, by the way, the actual ripping off of the suit, what keeps trying to cling to him is showing Raimi's skill, I think, as a horror film director. It's a very horror scene, and I think it really works. Topher Grace being there at the bottom, maybe not. Although again, Topher Grace being in this movie as Eddie Brock actually is much like that black costume. It's showing something about Peter that works, and that Eddie Brock is what Peter Parker would be if he were more of a jerk. And I'm jumping to my second exhibit here. I apologize for the weirdness of the transition.
No, go for it. You're fine.
But the transition here is. It goes against canon that Spider-Man's well liked, but it works for this movie because the whole emotional core of this film is Peter has lost his way. He just doesn't know he has. He's talking about how well loved he is in New York. He's buying into that hype. Even his opening narration it starts with, "Hi, I'm Peter Parker, and you already know. You know who I am. I'm important. I'm Spider-Man." To the point that even when like MJ's having problems, he's like, "Let me contextualize this through my experience. I know you're feeling things, but here's how I feel." And then you have, Harry.
Here's how I feel about it. It's the word that I've been saying the whole time. It's lazy. It doesn't connect the dots. It's just like, I do agree that these plots were interesting ideas on paper, but they're not fully executed. Like this Topher Grace thing that you're referring to, like really only happens in that one scene where he photoshops stuff. Other than that, he's just sort of in the background, floating around. And to just like sort of do a U-turn into the city's perception of Spidey doesn't line up with what we've come to expect, what we know the world to be.
Okay, well, I mean, but at the same time, what we're arguing here is, your argument is that they don't quite connect.
Yes.
But the fact that we can see them means they aren't failing. And you say lazy, and that ultimately things don't work out. But I mean, that last scene of this movie is probably one of my favorite endings of all time in superhero films, which is there's no dialogue. It's MJ singing on a stage. Peter comes in, bringing back the conversation they had earlier of her, like, "I always want to be singing on stage with you in the front row." And he says, "I'll always be there." He shows up. He offers his hand. They slow dance together quietly with tears in their eyes, kind of with no actual it's cathartic, but it's not final. And it shows that maybe we'll work on this. and you say that Topher doesn't really reflect, that Eddie Brock doesn't really reflect Peter, but he's clingy and obsessive over Gwen Stacy. Peter's being that with MJ. You know, he has the scene in the restaurant.
Reflection.
Well, he's
like,
having
like the shadier, slimier side of Peter that Peter's turning into, right?
Well, actually, that's before the black costume. Peter has he goes and sits down in the restaurant. It's a great scene. He has, first of all, the comedy bit with Bruce Campbell, but then he goes and sits down at the table and he starts fantasizing. He starts practicing what he's going to say, and then he starts fantasizing like, "Oh, don't cry." You know, it's this. There's an aspect of I
was crying.
Yeah, there was all this stuff that's in there about Peter as a person. And it's Peter not being the person that he has been in the previous two films. And you might say that's a departure, but it's supposed to be him relearning lessons that he thought he already learned. You know, he does go out and try to kill Sandman after the black costume's on, but he's already kind of thinking about doing that before he gets the black costume. And that's the point of the black costume, is that you can say is that he doesn't have that excuse. He can't say it was all the costume, it was all the symbiote. I was already being a jerk prior to that. I just didn't know I was being a jerk. And that's why he has to go kind of have, you know, an apology to Harry and ask for Harry's help. That's why, you know, MJ and him don't just have a nice, easy reconciliation. They have are we going to work on this in the future? You know, and again, all of that tying into the use of the ring, which keeps popping up in the film as this sort of idea that Peter wants to put a ring on it, but at the same time, he's not really thinking about what that ring means and what that relationship means. And so therefore there's this whole aspect of this film that I thought was very, very strong on the idea of Peter and MJ's relationship not really working because Peter is selfish. He's become selfish. And he doesn't...
Real quick, Mr. Haslar, would you like to respond to the relationship dynamic? That's not something you really talked about in your case between MJ and Peter.
Right, and I would agree that that's because that's one of the things that does work in this film. I do think that Peter and MJ sort of not being that great of a relationship really, and this sort of exposing that before he even starts turning evil, was one of the better ideas. Unfortunately, it falls on its face with that whole Harry Osborn trying to blackmail her into doing it. That makes the whole thing not connect and not make sense to me. And while it does sort of stick the landing a bit with that dancing thing at the end, the good kind of dancing, not the bad kind of dancing we were treated to earlier, it's that distraction of not having a full cohesiveness of that story from beginning to end that you would see in any other film make it work for me.
All right, thank you, Mr. Haslar. Any further points you'd like to bring up, Nathaniel?
Just that again, much like I talked about with the dance scene, where the ending of a story beat or a scene actually kind of giving it value, that even the Harry Osborn forcing MJ to break up with him, maybe it's muddy in the film, but it also ends with a great scene of Harry talking to Peter and mocking him over that breakup. And having that wonderful bit where Peter looks back and Harry looks over his shoulder and winks. And it's very evil, and James Franco actually does some pretty good work in this film.
Except they ruined that with that spy trope where he disappears behind a moving bus. I hate that.
Yeah, but he's
order. He has superpowers now.
He has superpowers. But I also one last point that I would like to make, and then again, it's all about certain scenes working. Is that there's actually some good action sequences in this movie, and it's something we haven't talked about. I actually think when I was watching it again, the actual fight between Peter and Harry towards the beginning of the film, with Peter trying to rescue the ring the whole time, I thought that was a great action sequence. I think it's really well done. I actually think his first encounter with Sandman's pretty well done too, with the armored car robbery. They all show an aspect of Raimi's ability to work with action in a very intelligent way, I think, and I think those scenes really work.
And would you like to rest there, Nathaniel, with
sure.
the action?
The defense rests.
All right. Well done, sir. Both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Haslar, you have the floor.
I think I've illustrated many reasons why this film doesn't work, standing to each of its villains. And I think my opponent has illustrated one reason why it might sort of halfway work. But there's one reason, above all, that this film deserves a guilty verdict, and it is as follows. Emo Pete, greasy hair, kooky Emo Pete. With a sigh, I don't know why, he tries to make Goblin Jr. cry. To him, he just wants to dance. Bub, at Sax or MJ's Jazz Club, you'll find the Emo Pete. I rest.
He sang.
I was so worried that you weren't going to sing this whole episode. Oh, delightful. All right, Mr. Jonsson, you may present your closing argument.
Well, I don't have a song.
That's going to hurt you.
Yeah, well, I don't have a song. Which by the way, my opponent likes to talk about how cringy the jazz club scene is, and then does the equivalent of a jazz scene bit.
You don't know Ben. You don't know Ben like we do, baby.
This film is not guilty of being a bad movie, but it's not innocent. It's not a good movie, but what is there works much better than I think its reputation suggests. I think that there's a lot of emotion in this movie. There's a lot of feeling in this movie. There's a lot of earnestness in this movie. There's a great cast in this movie. And which is something that Ben never mentioned. He didn't mention any about performances, which I think everybody's pretty on point with this movie. I think Toby knows what he's doing. I think he's still the best Spider-Man. James Franco's doing some great work. Thomas Hayden Church is doing some great work. Rosemary Harris is killing it. Her scenes are really, really memorable, in my opinion. They're very, very earnest, and they're very much what Sam Raimi wants to do, is this earnest film. Ben talked a lot about expectation. Talked a lot about posters and advertising and what that was promised. Where in reality what we got was a movie that was really very much interested in heart, not villainy, not violence. And I will give him certain points. I think that he made some very coherent points as to why this movie doesn't work. But enough of it does, in my opinion, to reach a non-guilty verdict. And with
All
that,
right.
the rest.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jonsson. Now, members of the jury, Mr. Dylan J. Schlender, Mr. Maynard Bangs, and Mr. Now dig on this, Ryan Luis Rodriguez, you have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. While you're in there, I'll be enjoying a nice cup of whiskey. I am Scottish.
Okay.
That's one of my favorite things from Bruce Campbell's thing is I am French. He just like throws that out there.
Oh, yeah, I am French.
Wouldn't you drink scotch? I mean, I understand it's a kind of whiskey,
maybe he's a bad Scotsman.
He's wearing a black costume,
like
so
he's not a good.
Well, I'm sorry if haggis wasn't stereotypical enough for you.
I love a good cold glass of haggis. Oh, it's delicious.
All right, a lot was said. We have a lot to chew on, guys. Ryan, why don't you start us off? What are your thoughts?
Wow. This movie. This fucking movie. For the longest time, I had it out for this film. It used to make me very angry. Now it just makes me a little gassy. I don't care is the biggest issue, I think, in that it's supposed to be about all these interpersonal relationships and how they evolve and change over the course of an entire trilogy, but I was rewatching it this morning and just this sinking feeling came into me. Just, I don't care about any of this. And this is beyond, did something land? Did something, was something missed in the translation? Was there something that Raimi didn't want to do that he was forced to do? And I don't care. No matter what the answer is, I just don't care.
All right, Dylan, do you care?
Yeah, I gotta say, Nathaniel's case made me care a little bit more. When I first saw this movie, like I thought like the dancing and stuff, that stuff didn't bug me. It was kind of a shock when everyone was like, "That was so stupid." I'm like, "Did we see the same movie?" I thought that all worked. You know, it's like he's evil now. You know, And I got to give a lot
but
of credit
to follow up though, like
Yes.
what I think, like Nathaniel said, is like he's as evil as Peter Parker can get, like,
yes,
which
is a very good point. I thought,
yeah,
it was a very good point.
it's
And
funny and goofy.
yeah, I thought Ben made some very good argumentation about a lot of this is really strung together. A lot of it, the connective tissue is incredibly tenuous. I mean, if you don't get up and use the bathroom, you're going to have no idea why this next scene is happening.
The sheer volume of convenience is truly absurd.
Oh yeah, it's to the point where it is distracting too. Another thing, it's like why is Topher Grace at the church? Why is Spider-Man going to the church? It's like none of these are religious characters. It's like what's going on?
They go to church.
Yeah, and and then the meteorite landing right next to Peter. It's like, come on.
I think,
so Maynard, what are you thinking? Because I'm impressed with both cases. I really am.
I mean, I think that Ben's points are largely correct, and I think it comes down to what Nathaniel said. It says, I mean, there's too much clay thrown into this movie. It's practically Spider-Man 4, and if you took out Venom, and so that you could extend the Sandman stuff and the Goblin stuff more.
You could keep the symbiote too. You just don't need Venom yet.
No, just don't even put the symbiote. Not at all. Just.
Oh, I think you still need the symbiote for the movie to work.
You can wait for 4.
Venom altogether. It's at least 30% better.
Exactly. Remove Venom altogether. Save him for 4, or remove Sandman altogether.
Or just don't do him.
Or remove Sandman altogether and just do Venom. But the whole point should have been it's Peter's problem with Goblin. I can't remember, with Harry, and they have to put their problems aside at the end to overcome some third foe. But we didn't need the other foe. And that's where it just becomes too diluted, and there's so much going on that you can't get deep enough into anything. That said, I love Sandman. And there's a reason why he came back in No Way Home, right? Is he is a great character. He's done surprisingly well. I think the effects they show a little bit for being how old they are now, but
2007.
Yeah, they're still pretty. I mean, when Sandman gains sentience. Yeah, well, when Sandman gains sentience, that's one of the best scenes in comic book movies to me. That's one of the best scenes in this whole trilogy to me. Sandman gaining sentience is awesome. It just happens a little too fast. Like, if that happened over the course of a few scenes, that he slowly learned things, but because we have to make time for Venom and all that crap, he has to learn how to Sandman in like a minute, which is unfortunate.
On par with Doc Ock's birth in Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Just condensed.
Oh man, you want to talk about a horror scene? My goodness, he was talking about ripping off the symbiote suit, which I did like. I did like that. I like everything that has to do with the sound for Venom too. Like that's a cool way to fight a villain.
Yeah. So, but one thing I did agree with Nathaniel said, Sam Raimi's movie is in there somewhere, and you get glimpses of it just a little bit. Which is the whole reason we're discussing the movie, because if it was downright awful, we probably wouldn't be. Ryan, which way are you leaning?
Well, I'm gonna have to go guilty.
You want to elaborate why? Besides the fact you don't care.
Besides the fact that I don't care, it just I mean I love Raimi, and a checked out Raimi is still Raimi, but it's so frustrating to see such a good auteur kind of shackled to an idea that he's really not passionate about, and especially when you have somebody that when he's at his most gonzo, there is nothing more adorable on the face of the planet than Raimi going full bore. And I think that's what ultimately holds me back here, is the fact that he is being shackled. And that's always intensely frustrating to me, but especially when it's somebody of Raimi's caliber.
Yeah, but I bet he still cashed the check. I'm going not guilty, because I think Nathan made enough points to pull me up. The expectation was set. Look, is this the best Spider-Man movie? Mm-mm. Absolutely not. But I do think there is enough stuff there. There's enough interesting.
It might be the worst Spider-Man movie. Well, no. Do we count the non-American ones? Yeah.
But even if you're talking the worst Spider-Man movie, like that doesn't. I mean, like that's not what we're here to discuss. It's just whether it's bad, in totality. And I don't think it gets all the way to bad. So I'm very comfortable with a not guilty on this one.
But speaking about Spider-Man movies, we're done with those now, right? We don't have to ever do it again. Like
you're gonna have to watch like
Shit.
the Korean one or whatever
Shit.
it was.
I thought we were done. I thought the multiverse made everything over and we were done. Damn it! God damn it!
So I think this is a bad Sam Raimi movie. I think it's a bad Spider-Man movie. But when I compare it to a lot of other movies, I think it just squeaks by, because I think there's enough Raimi in here, enough the Bruce Campbell cameo. I think the silly dancing is all very Raimi-like, because to me, that's Peter Parker being possessed, which is very Sam Raimi-like. So Peter Parker, when he's possessed, not like the rest of us, he doesn't go out and, fuck bitches and rob banks. He dances rudely. Like, that's as nasty as he can get. And I think all of that works. And I love Sandman. He's made of sand.
All right,
not
I finally
guilty.
got my bingo for this episode with
not
Ben
guilty.
And you saying he's made of sand.
I've said it for years. He's made of sand, not guilty. So let's get out there and tell that a very handsome judge.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus Spider-Man 3, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Woo! Yay! All right. Oh, man. Oh, boy. Listen to people shooting all that spider webbing. I think it's happening.
I can't find that. That's not a sound effect they have out there.
All right. The verdict is so rendered. Spider-Man 3 is hereby free to go. Possibly free to go to more multiverses. Court is adjourned.
No. We're done. We're done with Spider-Man movies. This is Spider Mumbly reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Whip, whip. The spectacular Ben Haslar. Would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Well, Spider Mumbly, I think that this is the kind of case that makes the Reels of Justice great, because there's just enough points on both sides that make the conversation interesting. So I do commend my opponent Nathaniel on the other side of opposing counsel. He made just the right points. The Peter and MJ stuff does work in this film. I do stand by my points as what makes it not work, but on a whole, I think it squeaks by as just being barely interesting. So bravo, sir. Thank you for the battle.
Excelsior. And here comes the amazing Nathaniel Jonsson. Excuse me, do we get a word on how you feel about today's verdict?
Sure. I had a great time doing this and having this conversation. I do think Ben is all of his points were ostensibly correct. There are a ton of problems with Spider-Man 3, but I'm glad that we got the not guilty verdict, because I do think that enough of it works to the point that it's just kind of a dumb, emotionally satisfying, but idiotic superhero movie. And so I'm pleased that we got the not guilty.
Idiotic is right. That's all we have from the court of today, true believers. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis. Enough said.
All right. Great case from both of you.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to shoot Big Ben.
What? Oh, I had one more point. Should have brought it up.
No, it was great. And I think we can all agree that Spider-Man 3 is better than Thor Ragnarok.
Nope.
No, we
Yes.
will not be.
Yes, we can.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Nope.
No, Nathaniel, what has been keeping you busy? What have you been up to?
Well, I do a podcast called At the Devil's Ball with my my co-host Samuel Numene. We talk about horror films in a positive and constructive manner. That's a weekly show, and that's a lot of fun. And I actually do highly recommend Samuel at some point if you guys want another a good defense attorney. I think he would actually have a good time with this. But other than that, it's mostly I've been working on trying to get another podcast project started, but haven't found the right combination yet, and I'm still working on that. But At the Devil's Ball is something I'm very proud of. We're coming up on our 2nd anniversary here in August.
Right.
So
We had ours not too long ago. But yeah, so like, what was a somewhat recent episode that like?
Well, we've had we still owe Ryan a good episode, because we've had him on a couple of times, and we haven't found it right. And Ryan is such an astute student of the game with film that that we had him on for Exorcist 2 back in like November, and it was kind of a disaster, and I felt really badly. But most recently, we just finished. Yeah, but most recently we just did some vampire films, and we had a good time with that. Where we discussed Nosferatu, which we had a really great time with. Salem's Lot was really fun. Speaking of a movie that is incredibly disjointed and doesn't quite work, Salem's Lot 1979 is definitely one of those. But yeah, we had a really good time with that.
Miniseries, right?
Yeah, that was the 2-part. Yeah.
It was.
And then this month we've got some great creators coming up, and we've got a gentleman who was one of the producers on Spookies and Street Trash. We're really excited about talking to him in a couple of weeks. So, and we've had Frank and Trace. I know you guys have had Frank Conniff and Trace Beaulieu. We were really, really thrilled to have them on.
And they do Batman Returns?
They did, in the sense that we didn't talk about Batman Returns at all.
I actually did listen to that episode 68, Batman Returns, where you said "At the Devil's Ball." I'm like, oh, I subscribe to that podcast. I should know who this guy is.
Yeah, yeah. We had a great time with them, but it was kind of clear that they were like, yeah, we don't really care about Batman Returns, but we'll talk to you about Batman. And we were like, okay, we can live with that. And we're hoping to have some other Rift Tracks MST3K folks.
So I could have been talking about Multiverse of Madness this whole time? Damn it.
Well, no, if you go on his show, you can, Ben.
Okay.
Yeah.
For his Spider-Man episode, right?
Yeah, and any of you, we would love to have you at some point. So yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. No, we'll definitely.
And if you ever need a juror or anything, I love podcasting, so I love doing whatever. So.
Well, hey, it's always fun having a guest juror anytime Ben and I want to argue about Star Trek.
Then we get to go against each other.
Exactly.
No more Star Trek. No, we have so many Star Trek movies left.
Oh, we're going to get them all, baby.
Nathaniel, we always ask for a recommendation for our guests for a movie you think people should see. So what is a movie people should see?
I think that everyone should see. I'm trying to think of something that maybe isn't talked about very often. Noah Baumbach made a kind of mumblecore early 90s film called Kicking and Screaming, which is still one of my favorite films ever. It's very, very Baumbach. It's very mopey. Characters not really actually having much conflict, talking about things. But I actually really enjoy the film, and I think it has a lot of great qualities. And so I think that would be my recommendation. Noah Baumbach's Kicking and Screaming, I think 1992?
95.
95, thank you, Ryan.
Is it proto-mumblecore, Ryan?
Yes, proto mumblecore.
I just coined that.
Yeah, Baumbach and Linklater were kind of doing it before like Kevin Smith got there, really, and that type of thing. Or Kevin Smith kind of changes it. Tarantino changes it, but they were kind of doing like weird dialogue-heavy movies prior to Tarantino and Smith kind of being like, we're going to make films that are entirely about dialogue. But yeah, it's one of my favorites.
It's very Whit Stillman.
I'm always saying that.
Yeah, I choose to pretend I know what that means. Big Ben, what is your recommendation?
I'm going to go with another Spider-Man film and throw my support behind Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. But Big Ben, Fantastic. Our listener, might say, oh, how well you you hate multiverse films. And I'd say, well, you do know me, Dylan's mom. But this one is an earlier one, so it sort of sneaks in before this whole thing became a very overly used trend. It leverages the comic book multiverse that Spider-Man had already sort of established in the comic books, rather than being just a cheap way to bring Professor Xavier into a Doctor Strange movie from a Fox property.
Spoilers!
Yeah.
Spoilers, Ben!
You knew it. You knew it.
Hey, this episode comes out in 2023. We're fine.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a film so visually distinct and cool that I'd wager you can pull this thing up at any random frame and would have to admit, damn, that's a cool looking image. But it's also just plain fun. Spider-Verse is streaming on some platforms that I'm sure you don't have, so you'll probably just have to rent it. But they have dozens of sequels planned already, so you're going to have to watch it anyway. But you'll be glad you did. It's a lot of fun.
No, it is great.
I'm pulling up an image and, yep. Yeah, it's a pretty good frame.
Yeah, that's cool. That's
pretty
cool.
Good, pretty good. Pretty nice. How do you know what streaming platforms I have? Don't judge me. Schlenzo,
we all have too many anyway. So I mean, yeah.
You have FX now, Maynard?
No, but I have New Japan Pro Wrestling, so that's pretty good.
For something.
Schlenzo, you are the judge. So what do you got?
Mine is streaming on FX later. So, I am recommending a wonderful adventure film that takes place in the Wild West with a twist. A warrior from the Far East is on a mission of honor and has to team up with an unscrupulous cowboy to fulfill his duty. The two start off not trusting each other, but as cultural misunderstandings start to smooth over, a friendship grows. Now, this movie has action, martial arts, swordplay, and
I already recommended Shanghai Noon.
And a surprisingly poignant ending. It may not be as funny as you remember, but you should still give Red Sun, starring Toshiro Mifune, and none other than the man we had before there were superheroes, Charlie Bronson. Give this movie a fair shake.
Charlie Bronson. But who said Toshiro Mifune? Is that the way you
That's
shoot
his
it
name.
out?
It's Toshiro Mifune.
There are actual dashes in the man's name.
Yeah, exactly. There's got to be dashes and maybe some ellipses.
And,
and I spelt it phonetically.
Yes. Umlaut. Well,
no, what's great about this movie is it's like
a few eggs.
It's Shanghai Noon, only it was made in the 70s with Charlie Bronson. It's pretty great.
Well, if that's not a selling point, what is it?
Exactly.
So for my recommendation, there's also Cowboys. For the most part, trilogies suck. We've had the unfortunate pleasure of putting several third entries on trial here on the show, from Alien 3 to The Godfather Part 3 to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. So today, my recommendation is a third entry in a series that doesn't suck as much as those two. It's 1990's Back to the Future Part 3. This time, Marty goes back to the year 1885 in the Old West to try and rescue Doc from a sad fate at the end of a gun barrel belonging to Biff's great-grandfather. Marty gets to meet his great-great-grandparents. There's some exciting train action. It's generally pretty fun, and at least follows up on a plot point set up in Part 2. As thin as it was. But the greatest strength of both Part 2 and 3 is assembling the original cast for 2 more films, because the world needs more Christopher Lloyd, more Michael J. Fox, and more Leah Thompson. Back to the Future Part 3 is currently streaming on Peacock.
But no Crispin Glover.
Peacock!
Ryan,
what's your recommendation?
My recommendation this week will likely no longer be in theaters by the time this drops, which means it can't be experienced in the ideal fashion, and it's called Top Gun Maverick. I have no affinity for Tony Scott's original film other than aesthetics, and this is the rare legacy sequel that delivers analog thrills and packs in some emotional stakes. I had the distinct pleasure of watching this in a crowded IMAX theater, and watching it on a television won't have the same impact, but no matter what, it's worth seeing. By the time you hear this, Top Gun Maverick will be found on Paramount Plus.
I have a really big TV, though.
Won't be the same. Won't be the same.
It's
my movie is on Netflix. Actually, I wanted to mention that. I think Kicking Steam is still on Netflix.
That is not a requirement, because then I have to do way more Googling than I'd like for our recommendations.
He just goes into Charlie Bronson's IMDb, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Bronson movies aren't streaming anywhere, so buy it on
There's a
DVD.
reason for that.
Yeah, there's a reason for that, Dylan.
And it's a bad reason. I'm hijacking the show. Welcome to the Charlie Bronson Hour.
It's a really bad reason to do anything.
At Charlie Bronson Hour, we have officially run out of show. But
Nathan, I'll come on your show to talk about Charlie Bronson.
For Nathaniel Jonsson for joining us.
Thank
you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope to have you back very soon in some capacity, back as a lawyer, back as a juror, one of those fun things.
Anytime. Love it.
We hope that you guys will join us again as listeners as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Bronson.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.